The Zodiac Killer. Inside America's most disturbing unsolved mystery. In American criminal history, there are cases that shock the public, cases that dominate headlines, and cases that fade away once justice is served. Then there are cases that never end. The Zodiac Killer belongs to that final category, a mystery so deeply embedded in the public consciousness that decades later, it still feels unfinished. More than 50 years have passed since the Zodiac Killer last claimed responsibility for a crime. Yet his name still sparks fear, fascination, and endless debate. Not because he was the most violent killer in American history, but because he was never identified, never arrested, never held accountable, and because he made sure the world would remember him. The Zodiac Killer didn't just murder people. He constructed a narrative. He inserted himself into newspapers, police investigations, and the collective psyche of an entire region. He turned fear into a performance, and law enforcement into unwilling participants. To understand why this case refuses to die, you have to understand the time in which it began. The late 1960s were a turbulent period in the United States. Trust in institutions was eroding. The Vietnam War, political assassinations, and social unrest created a climate of uncertainty. When the Zodiac emerged, he exploited that uncertainty perfectly. He knew fear traveled faster than facts, and he knew attention was power. The first confirmed Zodiac murders occurred on December 20th, 1968, on Lake Herman Road near Benicia, California. Teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were parked in a remote area, a place couples often went for privacy. At some point that night, a gunman approached their vehicle. Faraday was shot at close range and died almost instantly. Jensen attempted to flee but was shot multiple times in the back. The killer vanished into the darkness. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, and very little physical evidence. At the time, police treated the crime as a tragic but isolated incident. There was no indication that this was the beginning of a serial pattern. But 6 months later, that assumption would collapse. On July 4th, 1969, as fireworks exploded across the sky, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were sitting in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. A man pulled into the parking lot, drove away, then returned. He exited his vehicle and opened fire at close range. Mageau was shot multiple times, but survived. Ferrin did not. For the first time, the Zodiac left behind a living witness. Shortly after midnight, a man calmly called the Vallejo Police Department. He claimed responsibility for the shooting. Then, chillingly, he also claimed responsibility for the Lake Herman Road murders months earlier. He gave exact details, information only the killer could know. This phone call transformed the case. What had once seemed like disconnected acts of violence now formed a pattern. Then came the letters. In August of 1969, 3 major Bay Area newspapers received nearly identical envelopes. Inside were handwritten letters and fragments of a cipher, a coded message. The writer demanded the cipher be published on the front page. If it wasn't, he promised to continue killing. Each letter was signed with the same symbol, a circle crossed by a line. He called himself the Zodiac. When the cipher was cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife, the message disturbed the nation. The Zodiac claimed killing was fun. He described his victims as future slaves in the afterlife. But more revealing than the content was the tone. The message was arrogant, mocking, and completely devoid of remorse. This wasn't a man hiding from the spotlight. This was a man demanding it. The Zodiac's letters were not random. They were strategic. He used them to control the narrative, to test police intelligence, and to prove his dominance. Every letter was a reminder that he was still free. On September 27th, 1969, the Zodiac escalated again. At Lake Berryessa, he approached college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard in broad daylight. This time, he wore a black execution-style hood with his symbol sewn onto the chest. He spoke calmly, politely. He claimed to be an escaped convict. He tied them up. Then he stabbed them repeatedly. Shepard later died from her injuries. Hartnell survived and provided one of the most detailed accounts of any Zodiac encounter. Before leaving, the Zodiac walked to Hartnell's car and wrote on the door, listing the dates and locations of his attacks. This act was symbolic. He wasn't just killing, he was documenting his crimes like trophies. Less than a month later, on October 11th, 1969, the Zodiac committed his most brazen crime yet. Taxi driver Paul Stein was shot in the head in San Francisco. Witnesses observed the killer calmly wiping down the cab before walking away. Then came one of the most devastating police errors in the case. Due to a miscommunication over police radio, officers were mistakenly told to search for a black suspect. The Zodiac was white. As a result, officers encountered him and let him walk away. The killer vanished into the night. This single mistake may have permanently altered the course of the investigation. Following the murder, the Zodiac sent letters containing pieces of Stein's blood-stained shirt. This wasn't just proof, it was humiliation. A message that said, "You had me, and you lost me." The letters grew increasingly erratic. He threatened mass violence. He mocked police intelligence. He claimed a growing number of victims' numbers police could never confirm. Some ciphers were solved. Others resisted decoding for decades. One cipher remained unsolved for over 50 years until it was finally cracked in 2020 using advanced computing techniques. Once again, the message revealed no identity, no confession, only more taunting. As the years passed, the investigation expanded. Hundreds of suspects were considered. Thousands of tips were logged, but no arrest was made. The most infamous suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher with disturbing behavior and circumstantial connections. He lived near attack sites. He owned a Zodiac watch. A surviving victim tentatively identified him. Friends described violent fantasies, but circumstantial evidence is not proof. DNA testing years later failed to conclusively link him to the Zodiac letters. Other suspects emerged. Some were criminals. Others were ordinary citizens. Amateur investigators accused journalists, military veterans, and even law enforcement officers. Each theory gained followers. None produced definitive evidence. The case was plagued by the limitations of its era. Fragmented police jurisdictions, inconsistent evidence handling, outdated forensic science, lost records, missed opportunities. As time passed, witnesses died. Memories faded. Evidence degraded. Why did the Zodiac stop? Some believe police pressure forced him into silence. Others believe he continued killing anonymously. Some believe he died, his identity buried with him. Modern investigators now use DNA genealogy and digital analysis, but the results remain inconclusive. The Zodiac Killer endures because he represents something deeply unsettling: the idea that someone can commit horrific acts, mock authority, and disappear forever. He exposed the limits of justice. He turned fear into entertainment. And he left behind a mystery that may never be solved. Because in the end, the most terrifying part of the Zodiac story is not what we know, it's what we never will.